Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. It is your friendly neighborhood president's guy, and today we will be celebrating the birthday of one Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States, talking about the impacts of his life, the consequences of his presidency, and I'm going to go over a few books I recommend everyone read when they're studying up on Lincoln. Wait a few seconds, let a couple people get in on the chat, and then we'll dive right in on my favorite president. Excuse me. So the great thing about Abraham Lincoln, and probably the worst thing about him, is he's such a consequential figure in American history that he tends to kind of get what's the right word, adopted, so to speak, or used for different purposes by a different number of groups, whether that be modern day Republicans, whether it be you know pro union abolitionist type historians, and really they both kind of get it wrong. Lincoln obviously would not be a conservative by modern stretch of the imagination, but he also wasn't a lifelong abolitionist either. Lincoln obviously he's born in Kentucky, grows up in southern Indiana when his father moves him there because slavery was kind of taking a toll on the white yeoman farmer kind of class in the South, and it was taking away their ability to find work. So they went to Indiana and eventually into Illinois, where a lot of different laws basically forbade not only slavery but free blacks. So it was an opportunity for his father Thomas Lincoln to kind of find some work. And this is the area in which Lincoln grows up, not really exposed to any black Americans until he's in his early 20s, and even that's just kind of floating down a barge in the Mississippi River when he's just delivering some goods. He, he's quoted as saying, I've always kind of fundamentally been anti-slavery, but Lincoln was a big believer in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the fundamental principles of liberty. And even when he becomes president, he doesn't initially want to end slavery as it existed in that point in time because while he thought it was abhorrent, he was very much focused on protecting the constitutional property rights. He wanted to prevent its extension, which eventually would have meant its extinction. The secession of the southern states kind of forces that issue to come to the forefront sooner than it otherwise would have. But Lincoln, was always what you would call anti-slavery, definitely not an abolitionist. He definitely comes around to that, obviously. By 1862, he's issuing the Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, letting the South know that you've got 100 days to come back into the Union, to do it peacefully, and that if that doesn't happen, then he's going to, by presidential proclamation, free the slaves in the rebel areas under what he viewed to be the war powers that he thought the presidency had, that the Constitution gave him. He obviously extends his reach a lot during the Civil War, definitely suspends a lot of civil liberties, suspends habeas corpus initially without congressional support because they weren't even convened at the time. But Lincoln overcomes kind of his anxieties and his fears. And you have to understand the man's entire presidency was engulfed in a national conflict. And even with that, still manages to get a lot of legislation done. The Homestead Act, while never really panned out the way we would like, still only like 13% of the population, even today, lives between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. So it never really got established the way he would have hoped so or hoped for, but still found a way to legislate successfully outside of prosecuting the war. And to me, there's no man in history that I would rather spend 5 minutes talking to than Abraham Lincoln. Obviously, the tragic circumstances of the end of his life probably saved his legacy. No doubt we would view the man far more negatively than we do now had he lived to see, his second term into the beginning of Reconstruction, because he would have been probably as lenient, if not more so, than Andrew Johnson. He certainly would not have pursued any kind of treason indictments like were pursued against Lee and Davis. But who's to say how he would have responded to congressional reconstruction? Would he have vetoed anything the way that Andrew Johnson did? How much support would he have put behind the 14th and 15th Amendments? Probably not that much. One of the last speeches he ever makes, which actually kind of inspires John Wilkes Booth to definitively go into the idea of killing Lincoln, was the idea that military black men who fought in the Union military or the Union Army and those who met what he never really specifically explained, but would be kind of an intellectual bar, would get the right to vote. So he probably would not have been a big supporter of the 14th and 15th Amendments. But the mythology that surrounds Lincoln is probably more powerful than anything the man himself did. And there's a lot of books that obviously there's been, I think, some 15,000 odd books written about Abraham Lincoln. There's about 200 every year. But there's a few that I think everyone should read. John Meacham and Alan Gelzo have a couple of great books on Lincoln. But anything really written by Eric Foner, by James McPherson, I've got a couple of them here, and I would like to recommend. Obviously, anyone starting any kind of learning about Lincoln's history, the Bible on Lincoln and basically the entire government of the United States during the Civil War would be Team of Rivals. This is about Lincoln, his entire cabinet is about Bates, Seward, Chase, Stanton, and Lincoln. It is one of the most thorough biographies. The movie Lincoln is based around this book. So this is a must read. Eric Foner's The Fiery Trial, which basically focuses on Lincoln's perspective on slavery throughout his entire life. Another must read. Michael Lynn's What Lincoln Believed, which kind of delves more into his philosophy on other things besides slavery, but also a good psychological analysis of Lincoln. Lincoln's Gamble. This is about the 6 months leading up to the Emancipation Proclamation and sort of the internal struggle that Lincoln was having, both with himself and with this cabinet, and finding the right time to put that forward. But another great read. And then Tried by War, which this kind of focuses on just Lincoln as president during the war. And McPherson has a great one. You could sort of call it a companion book about Jefferson Davis. That's a great read to go along with it. But all of these are must reads. And obviously, there's plenty of other books on Lincoln out there, but those are some that I would really recommend starting on. Hey, what's up, Al? My favorite Lincoln moment of his presidency, his entire life, is the second inaugural. I mean, that speech, in my opinion, is way more important than Gettysburg Address because how it's worded. A lot of people definitely feel that way. Lincoln's second inaugural talking about binding up the nation's wounds, caring for the widow of those who have borne the battle, with malice towards none, with charity toward all. Some of Lincoln's best words, and actually on my wall here, I have the Gettysburg Address, the Emancipation Proclamation, and Lincoln's second inaugural, which is right here. So anyone who hasn't read those speeches really should. It's hard to say which one is more important, the Gettysburg Address or his second inaugural, because they both encapsulate kind of the feeling at the time. The Gettysburg Address more focused on the idea of preserving liberal democracy. Um, the second inaugural being more about let's come back together and remember that we are one people, the United States of America, that we are not going to have any grudges or hard will toward our fellow man, and that we have always been one people, and that's the most important thing here. And I believe that's the only speech Lincoln was ever photographed wearing glasses. So absolutely, and I actually have it in a collection. You can get it at Barnes and Noble. It's basically it's a condensed. It's probably about 1,500 pages, but it's basically a lot of Lincoln speeches, letters throughout his entire life. Gives you a better idea of what the man thought through various points in his life through his own words. A lot of these books that I mentioned also go into that. But to me, the most fascinating president we've ever had, the greatest president we've ever had, especially given the short amount of time that he was president. Just a month into his second term before he's assassinated. The first president to be reelected since Andrew Jackson, and again, just and in my mind, I probably mythologize Lincoln a bit too, and I'm certainly guilty of it to this day. But as I read more about him, I try to keep it in perspective. Um, with historical, as objective as a human being can be when analyzing someone. But the man was just a brilliant orchestrator of everything. I mean, the way he handles Chase and the radical Republicans, and the way he prosecutes the war. Certainly, some micromanaging of his generals, but I could not think of any one of our presidents that would have done a better job in that role. And America is better for Lincoln having been in the position he was when he was in that position. So on his birthday, actually, I believe it's also Frederick Douglass's birthday, if I'm not mistaken. I know he was certainly born in February, but let us celebrate these two monumental figures in history and never forget their contributions, especially as some lost cause types still want to try to demean Lincoln as a tyrant and an abuser of power and all these other nonsensical things. But let us not forget the impact that Lincoln made on the United States, and let us remember him with reverence. Let us be have some historical relevancy when we look at him and realize that we would not agree with many of his sensibilities today, but he was certainly ahead of his time. And if I could go back in time and just study the man, the way he moved, the way he thought, the way he handled people, and the movie Lincoln, while it gets a couple of things a little wrong, it is perhaps the greatest movie ever made. Daniel Day Lewis deserves all the credit in the world for that performance, but that is a movie I watch at least 4 or 5 times a year because it is just so inspirational from a historical and artistic standpoint. I can't recommend it enough if you haven't seen it. It's about 14 years old now, so I believe it's on HBO if you want to watch it legally anyway. But to me, there's no greater person than Abraham Lincoln in entire world history. To me, he's my favorite human being. So let me know down in the comments below what you think about Abraham Lincoln. How does he measure up against the other presidents, and what is his long-lasting impact? Is he your favorite president? Do you like or dislike Lincoln? Like, subscribe, share around, and until next time, never stop learning.